Evening. My name is Malcolm Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral. It is such a pleasure to see all of you tonight. You probably heard our conversation as we were coming in. I mean, this is the first in-person forum event we've had since like March 9th of 2020. And what a pleasure it is to welcome back Sadhviji to Grace Cathedral, which is one of her spiritual homes. We are so grateful whenever you come home. I welcome back home to Grace. So good to have you here.
Such a joy and such an honor. As I mentioned in the yoga class, just being here is such a blessing. And being here on International Peace Day is a double blessing. And being here after so long of not interacting in person is such an incredible blessing also. So I feel so grateful to be here.
I do too. And the last time Sadhviji was here was in July of 2016. So it's about
that long
years.
ago.
It was
wow.
that long ago. Yeah.
I was trying to remember.
I'm just going to, oh gosh, I can't read your dust cover jacket because my eyesight's gotten bad since then. American-born Sadhvi Bhagavati Saraswati moved to India in 1996. A graduate of Stanford University, she was ordained by Chittananda Saraswatiji, president of one of the largest interfaith institutions in India, into the tradition of sannyas and lives at the Paramath Niketan ashram in Rishikesh, where she leads a variety of humanitarian projects, teaches meditation, gives spiritual discourses, and counsels individuals and families. One of the world's preeminent spiritual leaders, Saraswati is the author of 4 previous books on spirituality and is also well known as a writer, speaker, and activist. She serves on several committees within the United Nations and the World Bank for international charity and economic development, and is a member of the Transformational Leadership Council, as well as the director of the International Yoga Festival. She lives in Rishikesh, India, and travels and lectures regularly in the US, UK, Europe, and Canada. You see like how much love your book got from me, like all the different little markings through it. I was telling Sadhvi that I spent the last few weeks just kind of living with you and your ideas. And I think part of what gives you that impression when you read the book is just how refreshingly honest and frank you are, how you are so courageous, and to talk about things that really haven't been treated in literature like this before. Partly because you're a woman, and women's voices, we haven't heard them. And then the first women's voices we were going to hear were not going to be about the most sensitive and challenging topics. So I'm so grateful for your courage in writing this. It meant the world to me, but I can imagine for people everywhere. It emboldens us to be really honest about the things that we've suffered and the things that have happened to us in our lives.
Thank you. That's why I wrote it.
Yes.
In that way, is there's so much suffering in the world, and such a large percentage of that is due to us feeling like there's something inherently wrong with us, with who we are, due to things that have happened to us, due to things that we've done, feeling innately, inherently unworthy. And I became aware, I've been in India 25 years, and I became aware of how many people felt like I was cut from a different cloth. I lead something called Satsang, which literally in Sanskrit means in the presence of truth. And it manifests usually as a question and answer session. And I lead it each evening, and people started prefacing questions with things like, well, I know you would never think like this, but, or, well, I know I never could be as pure as you are, but, and it really bothered me. not just because of how untrue it was, but because of how the person asking that question was depriving themselves of the opportunity to have the experiences that I had experienced, that they had just created this separation between them and me as somehow worthy, them as somehow unworthy, me as somehow pure or pious or whatever adjective it may be, and them as somehow not, and therefore less worthy. And I realized, in order to help people over their suffering, they have to understand that this is all available for them, that I wasn't cut from a different cloth, that I wasn't somehow born in a different way, but that actually I was cut from the same cloth, had the same types of experiences, new suffering, new pain, new trauma, new addiction, and new freedom and joy and peace, which meant that they could. And so that aspect actually became not just a part of or a byproduct of, but actually the core piece, because the rest is a fascinating, amazing story. And of course, I knew it was a fascinating and amazing story. And yet, I had spent so many years having people listen to my story, being fascinated, being amazed, being awe-inspired, but not in a way where they felt like, if she can do it, I can do it. And that was what I wanted. And I realized, in order to make people know that they could do it if I could, they needed to stop seeing me as somehow different, separate. And in order to do that, I needed to give the full story and needed to be that open, to be that vulnerable, to be that honest in all of the nitty-gritties, so that no one could read it and say, well, easy for her to do, but, I've suffered, so I can't do it.
Yeah, and I don't mean to spoil it for anybody, but I mean, Saraswati talks about experiences of abuse, talks about eating disorders, talks about sexual desire in a very clear way, talks about what it's like to be a woman and told to get off the stage, and what it's like to go through menopause. I mean, so I've read hundreds of spiritual autobiographies, but I mean, this is the first one that had those elements in it, and it made me feel like just I was in the presence of somebody who's going to be honest with me and who recognizes that spiritual life happens in all these different areas of our it's not compartmentalized. It's not what happens on Sunday or when you're part of satsang. It's everything.
And that is the other piece to it. That was my intention. I'm so glad that that's come out, is spirituality and humanity need to become one. We've spent so long separating out spirituality and humanity. So this is my human life, my human desires, my human relationships, my human struggles, and then this is my spiritual life, and whether it's Friday or Saturday or Sunday or each morning from 6 to 6:30 a.m. or whatever it may be. But this awareness that we need to bring spirituality into every moment of our day. And in order to do that, we have to make every moment of our day something that can be embraced as part of a spiritual practice, which means suffering, and it means conflict, and it means desire, and it means frustration, and it means all of that. And that, for me, is how I've lived it. Yeah. It wasn't that I actually had the ability to write a book in a different way than I had lived it. But because I had not been raised either religious or spiritual.
Yeah, that was something I thought so much about, because I mean, there's so many things that we share in common. Well, first of all, we're almost total contemporaries, right? So we're pretty much the same age. We're both ordained people. We're both in a secular environment, trying to communicate these very ancient truths. But that was one of the things that's most interesting to me about your story, and that is that you really were basically a non-spiritual, non-religious person. And I want you to talk a little bit about what that's like. Like, what does that worldview feel like? And then how did you kind of make that pivot to seeing the world in a kind of different way?
So for me, it wasn't so much a pivot, which implies
Yeah, you had like this
foresight,
trajectory, and then you moved.
Yeah, that somehow
I hate that
was
word
there
too.
with,
I don't know why I use that, but the change, I guess.
Well, yeah, but it was something that happened spontaneously. A pivot implies I have consciously, on some
Yes,
level,
right, completely.
contracted certain muscles in a leg group and have done this. It happened to me. I went into India with a backpack to travel as an adventure. It was a semester off of my PhD program. I knew nothing about India, had been raised in a Reform Jewish community, but it was never deeply religious. It was a cultural experience. We went to synagogue because it mattered to my grandmother. I was bat mitzvah because it mattered to my grandparents. We celebrated holidays together with family and community because it was coming together as a culture, as a people. But it was never about God. And it was certainly never about me as one connected to God. And then there I was, standing on the banks of Ganga, thinking the sacred river, what here we refer to as the Ganges, thinking that I had come down just to put my feet in the water. And it literally was like a veil was ripped off of my eyes, and I could see. But not just off of my eyes, it was off of every way of knowing that I have. And suddenly that which I had not ever thought of was there, undisputable, undeniable. It was a presence. And yeah, it belied in many ways everything I had always thought. But experience is so much more powerful than indoctrination. And especially when that indoctrination was as mild as mine was. I mean, it wasn't that anybody actually said to me, there isn't a God, or you can't be one with God. It just was, wasn't part of my life. And then suddenly here I was, granted this experience in an instant, having just gone down to put my feet in the water and suddenly looking out over the river. I was one with the divine. God was everywhere, everything, me. And that was just it. I mean, that was all of the experience. That was everything.
That's part of my favorite part. I like the mystical elements of your experiences, because that's exactly what I experienced. You know what I mean? And I wonder if you can talk too just about just how that feeling of oneness, that sense of just deep connection to the divine, how it kind of persists and changes over time as you've been on this, I mean, half your life now. I mean, you've definitely done the math, right? I mean, half your life you had that life, and half of the time you've had this life, you know?
Yeah, it's funny, I did the math in a slightly different way because I got very excited that in a year, when I'm 51, I will have actually been in India longer than I wasn't in India.
Exactly.
The idea that I will have lived in India longer than I lived in America was exciting.
Yes.
So that spiritual experience for me showed me the truth with every way of knowing that I had. So usually we know with our five senses. We see, we hear, we taste, we feel. It was all of that. It was a full sensory experience. But also it was, of course, that way of knowing that I guess you would call self-evident, right? Usually we use the self to understand other things, so they are evident because myself perceives them. But this was also self-evident, as in evident about the self. So it wasn't just perceiving that which was outside, it was perceiving that which is here. It was being infused with the presence of joy, of love, of truth. I mean, I just cried and cried and cried.
I identified with that. That part was completely me.
and I think it's actually completely most people when we have these experiences, because it just blows our heart open. It blows our mind open. It's why being in love feels so beautiful. Because when you're in love, you expand. When you're in love, that sense of I, which up until that moment had been just this body, this color, this race, this religion, this title, this career, suddenly in love, you've expanded. Now it's not just me, now it's us. And so I experienced that sense of no longer being constrained by these borders, by these boundaries, by this physical self. This was like being in love with the entire universe. I mean, I was in love with the atoms and the molecules and, the trees and the pillars and the marble steps, and it didn't matter. And my own fingers. I mean, it didn't matter because it was all infused with the divine presence. And it's important, by the way, for a moment to mention, when that happened, it wasn't a Hindu experience of God, or a Jewish experience of God, or any other religious experience of God. It just was the divine.
Yeah.
And once I've had that stays with me. And so people ask a lot about, well, okay, so, what about Judaism? And I always say, now that I had that experience of the divine, whether I'm in a church, a cathedral, a synagogue, a mosque, a gurdwara, a park, a beach, I feel the presence of God. Because it wasn't a God by a specific religion. Right. Yes, it happened in a place that is a Hindu place. It happened in an ashram that's dedicated to the teachings of Hinduism. It ended up getting augmented and expanded through ceremonies and experiences and teachings and moments that took place with people who were Hindus chanting things in the Sanskrit language. But it's not that there's a Hindu experience of God that when I walk into a church or a synagogue says, I'll wait outside.
Yeah. I think the question I had for you is just kind of much more practical because, you got something from your Jewish heritage and training that's helped you to be a spiritual leader in your unique way of being a spiritual leader. And I wonder if you can just talk a little bit about that, just because I don't think they're like God is not compartmentalized, but these two different traditions they leave an impress on us. And I'm certain your leadership has been affected by being part of that great tradition.
Absolutely. What I would say, though, is It's been impressed upon by the cultural aspects of the Jewish community, much more so than by the theology. And that just is because I never was actually schooled much in the theology.
Right.
I'm sure if I had been, that would have also deeply impressed upon me. It just wasn't part of my life. But the cultural aspects of the commitment to whatever one needs to do for God, not for God as in a master and servant, but for God as in to experience God, to be in the presence of God. Whatever one needs to do for one's freedom to worship God however one wants. That just unrelenting energy and stamina toward freedom, to be, to live, to practice, to experience, to love, to teach according to one's tradition is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And that sense of the way that one's connection to the divine infuses every aspect of your life. And so for me, the stories of the Jewish people and the heritage and the history and the holidays of miracles and struggle and tenacity have been the ones that have so deeply...
You have this great moment in the book where somebody asks you a question. And the person who's missing tonight is Swamiji, who in a way I feel like is present with us anyway, but
Yes.
I wish he was here, like
Me
sitting
too.
right here
Me
too.
too.
But because he's just such a delight. So Swamiji standing next to you, and you're like, I don't feel prepared for this question. I'm not ready for the
Yes.
question. But the question was about how do you forgive?
Mm-hmm.
And even that story is like so woven into, and your answer to it was absolutely perfect, which is, you need to forgive in order not to free this person, but in order to free yourself.
Free yourself,
Change
exactly.
that person. So I see these moments of just, but talk a little bit about Swamiji, what it was like when you first met him, and did you see how special he was right from the beginning, or was it something that you understood better over time?
So, for those of you not familiar yet with the Hollywood to the Himalayas story journey book, after arriving in India at 25 with a backpack, there knowing nothing, as I said, about the country, but there only because I loved Indian food and was a very staunch vegetarian and was on this semester off of my PhD program in psychology. My husband wanted to go to India. I agreed to make him happy, and because I loved the food. Rishikesh was the very first place we went, and after having this amazing experience on the banks of this sacred river and knowing I meant to stay there, knowing that this is where I'm meant to be, I was walking through the ashram that I now live in, called Parmarth Niketan, using it as just this very clean, very beautiful pathway to get from the hotel we were staying at down back to the river. And as I'm walking through it one day, I hear a voice that says, "You must stay here." And it's amazing because, you had spoken earlier about mystical experiences.
Yeah.
I was not a mystic. I was a scientist. I was an academic. I had never heard voices. I didn't know anybody who heard voices other than those who got treated in the clinics we were being trained in.
Yes.
And I don't even think I knew what the word mystic meant. I mean, it wasn't even in my vocabulary. And I heard a voice that said, "You must stay here." And I did what any self-respecting scientist would do, which is I ignored it. And I heard it about 30 seconds later. And I look up and I see a sign that says office. And the reason for this, just backtracking a moment, is, as you know, I had taken this vow on the airplane to India. And the vow was, I didn't know why I was going. I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area, where, as you all know, there is an abundance of fantastic vegetarian Indian food. You do not actually have to get on a plane and go to India. I didn't know what I was going for. And even though I wasn't religious, I always had this belief in a plan, a capital P plan. And if there was a capital P plan, there was a capital P planner. And so on the plane, I decided there must be some reason I'm going to India, even though I don't know what it is. And so I took a vow that I would keep my heart open, just so that I could know what the reason was, so I could find it. And that if I wasn't going to keep my heart open, that I would get back to California, that I wasn't going to just wander aimlessly around India for 3 months if my heart wasn't open. So when I heard the voice the second time, I realized if I ignore it again, I've actually got to go back to Delhi and get back on a plane and get back to California, because clearly I'm not keeping my heart open. Yeah. So the long story's in the book, but I'll fast forward. Eventually, I end up meeting the head of the ashram about a week later. I waited a week for him to come. He was out of town. And I needed his permission to stay, because at that time, 25 years ago, as a single female, you couldn't just waltz into one of India's most traditional, prestigious ashrams and say, I want a room. I needed his permission. And so I waited to meet him, and when I finally did, I felt like I was in the presence of someone who was so different from any being in whose presence I had ever been. And it felt like he just emanated love. Many years later, a very good friend of mine comes to India with her daughter, who was 5 at the time. And her daughter decides that she needs a private meeting with Swamiji, who not only is the head of this major ashram, but who's one of the most revered spiritual leaders in all of India. I mean, he's super, super, super famous. Walks down the street and people are pouring out of shops to bow at his feet. You know, we've had everyone ranging from His Holiness the Dalai Lama to Prince Charles and everyone in between at the ashram coming because of who.
And he's a very busy schedule.
Is. Yes, absolutely, very busy schedule.
Because he's putting together the Encyclopedia of Hinduism.
Exactly. So, but I want to tell you this very quick story because it explains my experience with him, but she explained it so much better than I ever could. So this 5-year-old decides she needs a private meeting with Swamiji. And so we organize it, and she gets shuttled in and has her private meeting. And she comes back a few minutes later, and her mom is in my office, and she comes in, and she's doing like this, and she says, I feel so lovey. She says, I don't want to take a shower. I don't want to touch anybody. I just want to keep feeling lovey. And we looked at each other, and we thought, that is exactly it. That is exactly how you feel in his presence. I never could have articulated it quite so well, but it felt like
body experience. It's a physical, mental, emotional, spiritual
of being in, quite literally, an ocean of love. And yet, as you know, because you've read the whole book, and anyone who's been in any spiritual lineage with a guru, a teacher, knows, it's also difficult. It's beautiful and amazing, and it's incredibly challenging. The analogy that I use a lot is the potter's wheel and the lump of clay
Yeah.
is you get spun around and you get hit. I mean, not literally. His guru hit him literally. He does not do that to us.
I'm glad.
But yeah, does not do that to us. But you literally get hit as you get spun around. And then you get burned in the metaphoric kiln. And at some point, you're able to kind of get a little bit of a perspective, and you're like, oh, you've actually turned this lump of clay into something useful. And, metaphorically, whether it's a vase or a bowl or a cup or, whatever the potter might have been making from the lump of clay, through being hit, through being spun around, through being burned, you've rendered this lump of clay into actually a vessel, a vehicle, something beautiful, something useful, an instrument. And yet you absolutely feel quite a lot of the time like you're being spun around and hit and burned, because it's all about the ego, it's all about the identification, it's all about the patterns, and that's ultimately what the path of initiation is about. Yeah. Whatever tradition you're in, is to get you freed of those patterns. And I was so stuck in my patterns. And he still is, the most amazing alchemist of the harsh, metaphoric, slap-spinning burning, and the most incredible divine mother energy of just that gentle lap of love and compassion, knowing exactly when each of those is needed.
Yeah, what I think so wonderful is just for him to be able to see what you really are in you in a totally different setting, in a totally different world. He saw what was going to happen and what your possibilities were. Yeah. And even though it was not an easy choice, for other people it would not have been an easy choice, he understood and he loved you and he cultivated, cared for you, helped you to be the best you could be.
Yeah, and it shows his courage.
Yeah.
Because it's not easy.
Well, that's what I loved about the book too, is you're just frank about it. I mean, it's just like everyone in the world is going to think that the two of you are lovers, and here you are. He knows that, you know that, and the two of you are both, strict to your vows, true to your calling, and you're not going to let other people's opinions about things interfere with the work that you need to do in the world, the ministry that you're doing in the world. One of the things I think so much. There's so many things in, like, between the pages. I want the book within the book. But one of the things you in the very beginning, you're like a child in the setting because you don't understand the language people are speaking around you. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what it's like to learn Hindi and Sanskrit, and just how those those languages bring something out of you that you may never have been able to discover if you just were an English speaker your whole life.
How interesting. For a long time when I didn't speak anything, it actually was really beautiful because I would sit in the room where Swamiji would give what's called darshan, where he would meet people and give blessings. And when you don't understand the words, you're really sensitive to energy and intonation. And I was so aware of the way that he was speaking to people and the love with which he was speaking to everyone. And it was so beautiful to just kind of be able to just drift off into meditation, because when you understand the words, they engage your conscious brain. But when they don't, it just sounded like this beautiful melody. And I would just listen and listen, or being around other people speaking in Hindi, just listening. As I started to learn, I did not learn it academically.
Yeah.
I learned it just by speaking, and I learned it by speaking with children primarily, who used to actually play a lot of tricks on me. Kids are kids, and I learned from the children who live in the ashram, and they would teach me different words at a time, and we would practice. And every once in a while, they would decide that it was time to have fun with, the gullible white lady, and they would teach me some word that was like village slang, vulgar village slang, and they would tell me that it meant something completely different. And I would then go and use that word in very, elevated company, and people would be like, what did you just say? And of course, I would repeat it lest they missed my brand new vocabulary word. And depending on the situation, because they varied, they would either tell me what it meant, or they would then start to ask me, where did you learn that word? So I would go back to the kids all angry, and they would giggle and, poke each other and pretend it was somebody else's fault, right? But eventually I really started learning, and it's been so extraordinary because I think in Hindi so much.
Yeah.
And I have found that I've gotten to a point now where there are things that come out of me so much more comfortably in Hindi than in English, where if I'm actually in an only English audience, I have to stop and think, what is the appropriate English way of saying that? Sanskrit, and Hindi, of course, is...
They're cognate.
Yeah, a lot of overlap with Sanskrit. The alphabet is the same, and so much of it is the same, especially the Hindi where I speak, where I live. In other parts, it's been impacted by Urdu and other languages, but where I am, it's still very, what they call Shuddh Hindi, like pure Hindi. There is a magic to that language. A real magic to the Sanskrit language, which is why, the science of mantra, for example, which is something that so many non-Hindus are doing. I mean, there's so many people from America, from Europe, from South America, from all over the world who are studying the science of chanting mantras. Not because they are becoming Hindus, not because they're converting, not from a religious perspective, but from the magic of the sound. And for me, learning the Sanskrit language and learning the mantras, it feels like it alchemically changes you. To be able to chant in Sanskrit, it's not just that you're chanting or singing, it's like something is happening inside of you as you are chanting and singing it. It's very, very powerful. There's a whole science of it, of the science of sound. So, yeah, it's been a whole new experience of literally reverberation of energy within me.
Vibration.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I do think that different languages open up to us to different possibilities. I've been spending a lot of time with Hebrew lately because my Hebrew has been so bad, but it's been wonderful to revisit the language. And these psalms that I've memorized and know by heart, they just have a very different meaning when I read them in Hebrew than in English. And my very dear friend in seminary was trying to learn Sanskrit. He broke down and couldn't do it. But I think one of his biggest disappointment up until that point, because he recognized the beauty of that language.
Well, it's never too late.
Yeah, it's never too late. I think of him so many times when I start talking about Sanskrit. It's just that it was so inflected. He had a hard time getting it. But one of the things I absolutely had to ask you, and I've got like 25 questions on my paper, but if I forgot this question, I'd be so disappointed. And that is, there's a way in which there's a kind of spirituality in California. Do you want me to fix that for you?
Yeah,
go. In the old days, I'll have, but we're not
think
allowed
I'm
to touch each other.
That's all right.
So what you do is you just kind of rotate
I think
the
it's
whole thing.
okay now, yeah?
It's okay.
Okay, I'll try not to move too much.
You can move. You can move. But I wonder if, I mean, you and I share something of just like California culture. And when I look across the world, I wonder kind of what influence that culture has had just in terms of how you do religious things. Like, so
it's had
how
a
you
huge
wrote the
culture,
book.
a huge impact.
I think so too. So I mean, whether you're at San Francisco Zen Center or at Green Gulch, or you're going to Esalen, or you're at Grace Cathedral, or you're at Temple Emmanuel, I mean, there's a way in which, even though these are all vastly different traditions, there's something about
Yes.
California that is. So I wonder if you can talk about that, because I can't do it very well.
Well, it's interesting. You've asked very interesting and brand new questions. I mean, I've done so many interviews around the book, but these are brand new,
That's
beautiful
It's
questions.
so much easier just to tell a story from the book.
No, these are beautiful. It's
Yeah.
wonderful. I love them. So, California culture for me, in terms of how it's impacted me as I think about it, is I think it's given me that sense of the importance of the truth and the importance of honesty and the
Yes.
importance of openness, because Asian culture in general, not exclusively India, but I think all of Asia, and I think actually many other cultures in the world as well, but not California, are cultures of sweep it under the rug, don't talk about it. You know, you're having a fight in the house and somebody rings the doorbell and you, hi, how are you? In my house, if my parents were having a fight and somebody rang the doorbell, it was like, what the hell do you want? You know, we're in the middle of a fight. We are what we are. I mean, there was no sense of nicing it up for who called or nicing it up for whoever showed up on your doorstep. And that ability to be open, that ability to know that sweeping it under the rug isn't the answer, that if it's there, let's talk about it, let's be open. For me, it's been amazing because while I had a lot of other issues, as the book shares, and as you know, from my history, from the abuse, from the eating disorder, from so much, shame around what I thought, what I felt, never was one of them. I definitely had a sense of not being worthy on a lot of levels, of kind of not being right, there being something wrong with me. But there never was a sense of shame of like, I shouldn't feel like this or I shouldn't think like this. And so, for example, you referred to the chapter on sexual desire. So yeah, when a few years after taking vows of celibacy, suddenly there I was having all of these fantasies about a specific person. It's a fun story, I won't ruin it for you here. But I went to my guru, I told him, like, here's what's going on. And there was embarrassment, as in, I shouldn't really be having this conversation with him. You know, it's kind of the thing that you always just talk to friends about over a cup of coffee. So there was that embarrassment of just like, I probably shouldn't be saying this to you, but the idea of this being shameful, which I know so many others in the monastic traditions are kind of schooled to think and feel and therefore don't open up about. I didn't have any of that.
Yeah.
So that's been amazing. And all of the aspects of who I am, like the other chapter that you spoke about getting kicked off the stage for being female. For me, there was no way that regardless of the fact that it was my femaleness that got me thrown off the stage, there was no way that I was going to feel less than because I was a woman.
Yeah.
Whereas I know that in India, in the world of religion, there's definitely a sense, and it's a much bigger topic than just this right now because we, of course, worship the Mother Goddess. We pray to the Mother Goddess. We've got entire holidays dedicated to the Mother Goddess. And yet, there's definitely a sense of it being a man's world. But for me, there was no way that I was going to do anything other than fully embrace and love my womanhood.
Yeah.
And then the challenge became, of course, to create that space in my awareness, to hold the reverence and the love for those who had kicked me off the stage, for the tradition I had embraced, due to which I had now been kicked off a stage, while simultaneously holding the reverence and love for the very female nature of who I am. And that it wasn't an either or. It wasn't that I needed to revolt against the tradition or the system, or that I had to somehow feel badly about me, but that there actually was a yes and option. Yes, I love this country. Yes, I love this tradition. Yes, I even love the beings on that stage. And yes, I love this female body. I love that I came into this world as a woman. And I'm going to just sit here with those two yeses until my awareness creates enough space that they can coexist peacefully. So I think a lot of that, I think, is, to me, when I think of California culture, the kind of as you are, whoever you are, show it, be it. It's a world, as you know, where pretty much people are not very worried about what other people are doing. In India, people say to me, do you get a lot of strange looks when you walk down the street in California? I'm like, in California, people just really are not so concerned about what other people are wearing or doing. Whereas in Asia, there's so much more of an attention on what others are doing, so much more of a self-consciousness of what others are thinking about me. Whereas California is such a place of kind of everything goes and anything goes, that I think it allowed me to bring all of me. Like, I don't feel on any level that any part of me had to be removed or changed or anything in order to be able to embrace that culture. And I think that that's really the Californian of, like, here I am, and it's all good. And there's a lot of work to be done. Yes, I was suffering. Yes, I was struggling. Yes, I was attached to all kinds of identities. And yet, as you are, who you are. Yeah,
I love it because just in reading it, like I said, that was what attracted me to so much to it, and what makes it unique is that just being who you are and being at home in your own skin, and being able to help other people, by just being who you are, helping other people to be who they are too.
And that's been, it's been really, really amazing, and I think also really important. It goes back to that humanity in spirituality that I was talking about. So in India, religious leaders, in many ways, are not seen as human.
That was another big thing that's kind of, for me, I have all these friends who have Hindu mentors, gurus, and it is that for them, they're not human.
They're not human.
They're magical creatures.
And the devotion is beautiful. There's nothing wrong with that devotion. The dilemma is that with a human body that needs to go to the bathroom and that needs to drink water and that needs to eat food. The events in India go on hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And I am the only person, I've been there 25 years, as you know, I am the only person I have ever seen, other than very, 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 very old men who clearly have something going on with the prostate.
Right. Who
has walked off a stage in the middle of an event to go to the bathroom and come back.
Yeah.
I've never seen it happen.
Yeah.
And you think, 5 hours, 6 hours?
Yeah.
And just that, the idea that somehow the calls of nature, and of course in spiritual practices, when you have made a sankalp, you've taken a vow, tonight I'm not going to go to sleep. It's a holy day. It's Shivaratri. It's Krishna Janmashtami. It's a very sacred full moon. I'm going to stay awake all night meditating.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Great. You learn how to overcome the urges of the body, or just to be present with them but not give in. Or you take a vow, I'm fasting today. Not going to eat. Okay, the urges come, you don't give in. But that's for a very personal, spiritual practice,
Yeah.
rather than a sense of that's because that which is expected by the culture. And so I've actually gotten to a point where I kind of purposely, to the extent that I can in environments where I can, do things like drink a glass of water,
Yeah.
go to the bathroom, just so that people remember, oh yeah, she also drinks, she eats, she pees, like, wow, this is actually a human body.
Right, right.
I think it's so important, and it seems so obvious, but you lose it in the world of transcendent spiritual beings.
Yeah, oh, completely. And you do such a good job of just talking about the way our body, and even just your ministry is so wrapped around bodies and caring for people's bodies and helping them to care for other bodies. So yeah, it is important. I completely agree with that. I think that's part of what I love about yoga, is that it's a physical practice, it's a spiritual practice. And I just need more physical, spiritual practices in my life. So I'm
and
grateful for it.
I think having your congregation see you on a yoga mat is fantastic, and probably has huge ripple impacts in the same way of like, oh, look, he takes care of his body. It's not just he prays to God and God loves him, and so he will be taken care of. But look, here he is on a yoga mat.
Yeah, definitely. I think so much about how things have changed, and you're settled in. You're like, you and I are. I feel sometimes that we're like, this is our moment. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
like my physical health, and I'm better at what I'm doing now than I was when I was first learning. But I wonder if you can talk just a little about like what kind of spiritual challenges you face, and if you don't want to talk about that, the other possible question is for people who are beginning spiritual practices like meditation. Do you have any words of just to help them in terms of undertaking something new like that? So either question would be great.
I have more to say about the second one than the first, but I will give you the answer to the first one.
Yeah.
It's just a shorter answer. My spiritual challenge today is the same as it's been for 25 years, which is getting myself out of the way. It's easier than it was 25 years ago. I've learned how to do it. It's less frequent that I find, oh my God, there I got in the way again.
Yeah.
But the challenge is the same. It's still about, my prayer is the same. My prayer to God hasn't changed in 25 years. It's, oh God, let me be that clear vessel for you to flow through. Let me get out of the way so that I can be that clear vessel for you to flow through. So that challenge has been there the same the whole time.
Yeah.
And in terms of people beginning a practice, what I would say is recognize that you're coming back to yourself. The downside of the California culture is we are amazing marketers. And so whatever it is that you want to learn or do, there's going to be lots of people really happy to sell you a system of doing that that's going to cost you a lot of money. And remember that meditation is it's not rocket science. It's not learning something that you need somebody from outside to tell you astronomy, quantum physics.
Yeah.
Meditation is actually, you're going back to yourself. Having a teacher, having meditation guides, videos, they're very, very helpful because the mind wanders a lot. But what they're helpful to do is to just keep you focused. Do not think that it's about somebody else who's going to show you through a practice that is somehow inherently better than what the guy next door has. What I would say is whatever works for you in meditation, do it. People always say, is there, what's the best way? And I always say there is no best way. There is no right way. There's a wrong way. The wrong way is to hit the snooze button and go back to sleep.
Yeah. Or I'll do it later. Or,
Exactly.
I'll skip a couple days because I'm busy with something.
Exactly. Or to sit there with your eyes closed making a shopping list.
Yeah, definitely.
But beyond that, it's all about what practice for you enables you to find the space between your thoughts. Because the thoughts are all rooted in some kind of an identity. It's about the past, it's about the future, it's about an anxiety, it's about an expectation, a hope, a fear, some personality aspect. Meditation is that which enables you to experience the self between the thoughts. And so whether it's a mantra-based meditation, whether it's a breath-based meditation, whether it's with music, without music, chanting, passage meditation, whatever it may be, just do it. Just do it. Commit to a time and just do it. And slowly, 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 that'll become who you are.
Yeah.
It'll become how you move through the world. And the last piece that I would say about that is carry your meditation with you off the mat. When you open your eyes and you stand up, your meditation isn't over. When you get off the mat, your yoga is not over. We think about the seated meditation, the stuff on the cushion on the mat, as the charging of your batteries. But then you're supposed to carry it into the world. And so the question becomes, how can my life become meditation, become yoga? And for me, that's been just such an extraordinary blessing of how through the day, through whatever I'm doing, how to try to find that space between the thoughts, to anchor in that space, anchor in that truth of the self, that awareness, that love, that peace, that consciousness.
Yeah, for me, it's a sense of drawing near to God, and that nearness to God is accessible during the rest of the day.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sadhviji, I can't believe that bells just rang. It means it's time for us to say goodnight. I can't. If every time you go away, I come up with 30 more questions, and we only ask at 5 of them each time.
I'll come back. I'll come back soon.
Come back sooner than
will.
5 years. It's been such a pleasure to see you. And, I had all these dreams of hearing about what the world was like, what COVID was like, and a zillion other questions, but they'll have to wait for our next time.
We'll do a full day retreat next time, maybe.
It's a great idea.
Maybe we do
be
a full
fun.
day program.
Completely.
That would be
love
fun
that.
with yoga
Yes.
and meditation.
Exactly.
That would be fun.
That would be fun. We're so glad for all of you coming tonight for our first forum in so long. And thank you so much, Sadhviji. You're such a gift to all of us. Give Swamiji our best as you go.
I will, and I'm so honored to be your first guest back. I mean,
Yeah.
that's such an honor in a year and a half.
A year and a
That's
half.
grace.
It's grace. It's
That's
grace.
grace. What an honor. And we're so hoping to welcome you to India also.
I know. One day I'll go. My brother used to live in India. He said that he learned Hindi, but with a toothless accent because his teacher didn't have any teeth. So one day I'll get my brother together and we'll come and see you.
That would be so beautiful.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody, and drive safely or get home safely. And thanks for coming tonight. Good night.